Greetings, drowsy spirit. Tonight, I will tell you a story that will help you fall asleep soundly. Remember to subscribe for more bedtime stories and like the video before we start. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in the comments section. I would also love to know what story you would want to hear next. I'm not very proud of this story, so I never thought I'd wind up sharing it. Admitting how far I've fallen and how close I came to never leaving is both embarrassing and shameful. However, whether you want it to or not, the past can occasionally wriggle its way out. My name is Adrian Merrick, and I began searching Craigslist shadowy corners for company when I was 28 years old because my life had reached a standstill that I used to live in Gray Haven, Illinois, a dilapidated town that appeared to have abandoned itself years before I was even born. The steel mill was no longer in operation. They boarded up the train station, and Main Street was filled with dingy taverns that smelled of smoke and stale beer, pawn shops, and payday lending agencies. Entire residential blocks were deserted, their windows shattered, their perception distorted. Those with alternatives had long since departed. I stayed, eking out a living while observing the town decay all around us. Above a laundry, I rented a one-bedroom flat. Long before I came in, cigarette smoke had yellowed the walls, and the radiator clanged like a hammer against pipes throughout the winter. Every night, the smell of dryer sheets and detergent crept under my door, telling me that I had a larger existence than that. It was unmemorable. Work wasn't helpful. At a warehouse on the outskirts of town, I loaded trucks. Boxes piled until my back ached, endless pallets, and midnight shifts. The type of work where nobody knows your name, where you leave the office drenched in dust and perspiration and question how long you can keep up this way until your body fails. My social life had also fallen apart. After my fiancée, Claire, broke up with me, I had been unattached for more than a year. She informed me she had had enough of waiting for me to straighten out my life. With a partner who had ambition, ideas, money, and everything else I lacked, she relocated to Chicago. My pals drifted when she left. They gradually stopped making calls when I stopped returning their calls. There was just silence at night, the kind that is so oppressive that it may choke you. Craigslist stepped in at that point. I was laying in bed late at night, browsing through my phone in an attempt to fill the void with glowing screens. From I went on the mails looking for women's section out of boredom. Most of it was trash. Scammers, phony advertisements, and hazy pictures of women I thought weren't genuine. Men who sounded as lonely as I did said, "Sad, please." Then I caught sight of her. It was a brief post. A 26-year-old woman seeking something easy. No drama, no strings attached. Just one evening. If you're serious, message me. The picture that's included is what made me put an end to it. It featured a brunette woman sitting on a couch with her hair wrapped back in a black hoodie. It wasn't a glamour photo or an Instagram model. She wasn't attempting to seem flawless or posturing. She had a typical appearance. It was credible because of that. Maris Vera was the name she had on the post. For 10 minutes, I gazed at it, my chest constricted. I was aware that it was most likely a horrible decision. I knew I should put the phone down, attempt to fall asleep, and close the app. However, loneliness is what makes a man careless. I typed a message against my better judgment. Me. I noticed your post. Tonight, are you still looking? Silence was what I anticipated. A scam response, perhaps. Rather, my phone buzzed less than a minute later. It was a blue bubble. Maris. Yes, I am at liberty. Who is this? My heart leaped that I texted back, trembling my thumbs. Me? My name is Adrian. 28. Tidy, considerate, drama-free, and without a complex agenda. She responded almost immediately. Good, Maris. My name is Maris, and I'm 26 years old. I just want to make this simple. Are you comfortable with that? I swallowed the lump in my throat after hesitating. Me? Yes, I find that to be effective. We continued our conversation. She wanted to know if I was protected. Yes, I replied. How soon can I get there? She inquired. She then forwarded the address. The final residence close to the woods is 2415 Dusk Willow Lane. I read it 3 times. I felt sick to my stomach, but I was powerless to stop myself. I quickly typed back on my way, took out my jacket, and walked out. At night, it always felt like you were walking through a cemetery at Gray Haven. The streets, half lit by flickering lamps, were silent. Houses slumped into the shadows. The curtains are drawn. The town itself seemed to be holding its breath, and the air felt thicker as well. The houses became less in number as I continued to drive onto the east side. Yards became more untamed. The fences leaned. There were fewer streetlights. My chest constricted as I turned onto dusk Willow Lane. It was trees that leaned in as though they wanted to cover the road's tiny, damaged surface. I saw it at the end of the street, just before the woods ate up the pavement. A little single-story home. The skewed numbers were illuminated by a solitary porch light that glowed dimly. 2415. Weeds were curving up the steps, the grass was tall, and the yard was overgrown. The porch was sagging and the siding was fading. It didn't appear welcoming. It appeared deserted. My motor hummed as I parked on the street and sat there looking at it. My stomach begged me to get out. Rather, I grabbed my phone. Me? I'm present. Which residence? The response was practically immediate. Maris. 2415. The final one. Turn around and return. I scowled. Me. Why the rear? After appearing, the typing bubble vanished. No response. With my thumb lingering over the screen, I sat still. Leave was the cry of every instinct, but loneliness is louder than terror. I put my phone in my pocket, silenced the engine, and ventured out into the darkness. I pushed the wooden gate open, and it moaned. The smell of damp earth and weeds filled the backyard. I entered cautiously, the grass brushing across my sneakers. There were no lights on within the looming, gloomy home. In the middle of the eye, froze in the yard. A small brook. My blood went cold as I raised my head. From the window on the second floor, someone was observing me. A figure in the shadows, face hidden, motionless. The blind slammed shut as soon as they knew I had spotted them. In my hand, my phone buzzed. Be right out, Maris. Just a quick refresher. Remain in place. My heart pounded that I had slippery palms. Then, to my right, there was another sound. A gentle snap, like to a branch snapping. I lifted my phone slowly and turned on a flashlight. The beam landed on the shed in the corner after sweeping across the yard. There was a movement. I think I saw a pale arm disappear into shadow as it slid behind the shed. I felt cold all around. With my heart racing, I quickly turned off the lights and made my way back to the gate as silently as possible that a window overhead crashed open as I reached for the lock. The voice of a lady screamed into the darkness. Hold on, don't leave. It was incisive, desperate, and insane. I ran. I ran to my car and pushed the key into the ignition while throwing the door open. I spewed gravel out of my tires as I floored it. The house's front door slammed open. The night was broken by a gunshot. The automobile gave a tremendous jolt that I jerked my steering wheel. I had blown one of my tires. I continued to drive, my chest heaving with each strained breath, sparks flashing as the rim slapped the road. I waited until I was 5 blocks away to stop. I contacted roadside help once my shaking stopped. Half an hour later, the repairman arrived. Whistling, he knelt beside the torn tire and held up a twisted fragment of metal. He remarked, "That's a bullet. Your tire was shot out by someone. You're quite fortunate that it didn't strike you." I told the police everything when they got there. I was relieved when the repairman swore on my behalf and showed them the bullet. I discovered the truth later. At the house, 3 people were taken into custody. 2 males and a dirty-looking woman who resembled every dreadful picture of predators in the backcountry. They had been luring individuals in with phony Craigslist advertising. I constantly consider how close I was to entering that backyard, even though the house was condemned shortly after it never to leave again. I swear I can still feel people watching me when I drive close to Dusk Willow Lane. There are moments when I catch myself looking toward the woods, half expecting to see someone waiting. Years have passed, yet the fear and the guilt are still there. I will never use Craigslist again since I am aware of how close I came. When my father brought the first family computer home, I was 8 years old. It was nothing new. Actually, his workplace was getting rid of a big, beige desktop computer with a huge monitor that made a subtle buzzing sound when it warmed up. However, you would have assumed that Dad was bringing home a newborn baby when he carried it in through the front door. Mom wrung her hands as if they could break if he put it down too firmly, saying, "Be careful with the cords." This is more difficult than it seems, Dad said with a smile as he knelt down at the dining table to plug it in. You'll see. The future is this. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, watching the ritual. He pressed the big square power button, and the machine hummed alive. The screen glowed with that old Windows logo, and my mom clapped softly. Dad beamed like he just pulled off a magic trick. You want to try? With a reference toward the chair. I clambered up, my tiny fingers twitching uneasily over the mouse. He launched Microsoft Paint and demonstrated how to draw lines and apply color to shapes. You're painting with light, he remarked in a quiet, almost respectful tone. That stayed with me. My dad wasn't usually sentimental, but the computer made him feel that way. It was more than a machine to him. It was a door, a key. We switched to dial-up internet by the time I was 12. The delays, the screaming call tone, and the lengthy wait for a single page to load, it's ingrained in my mind. However, I didn't remember the sound. It was the way Dad's entire attitude changed. He had been eager and thrilled with the computer. However, he was cautious, almost afraid, when using the internet. One evening, he leaned on the back of my chair and muttered, "Remember," as I browsed a child's website. "The internet's not a toy. It's a loaded gun." I chuckled. "A gun," he replied clearly. "Yeah, someone is injured when pointed in the wrong direction." I was unable to decipher his meaning. I saw it as little more than chat rooms, silly flash animations, and games. Like parents, I assumed he was exaggerating. However, as I grew older, I began to see that he wasn't entirely incorrect. By 16, I had figured out how to use the internet covertly after they had gone to bed. I would wait until the house was still, with only the hum of the kitchen's ancient refrigerator to accompany me. After that, I would visit websites my parents were unaware of. I discovered Craigslist in this way. It was merely curiosity at first that I was drawn to the discussion boards that were hidden away in its recesses, but people also wrote about furnishings, jobs, and personal matters. It was like getting a glimpse into strangers' innermost thoughts. There are those who were angry, lonely, and insane. It was unvarnished and raw. I came over a post titled The Story of Anna one evening while perusing the religion and philosophy board. Watcher74 was the generic username. I initially believed it to be some eerie spaghetti, but the writing style wasn't styled. There was no drama. The text resembled a news summary, as if someone were recording an actual event. In 2007, a man by the name of Marek Havel lived in Brno, Czech Republic. In order to keep an eye on his baby boy, the young father had just set up a video baby monitor. He turned it on one evening and froze. His child wasn't the fed. He didn't even own the house. A dim basement appeared on the blurry picture. And there was a boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, gagged and bound in the corner of that basement. Marek went into a panic that he believed he was having hallucinations. The image persisted even when he switched the display on and off. The boy's eyes were wide with fear as he shuffled and tried to move. Marek dialed 911. The signal must have crossed with another baby monitor nearby, the officials conclude. In order to find a basement that fit Marek's description, they knocked on doors and walked around the neighborhood. After some time, they reached Lena and Ivana Vasila's house. On the surface, they appeared to be normal. They were both in their 30s, one of them divorced and the other unmarried. They raised 2 young boys together. A 13-year-old girl named Anna, whom Lanka had adopted, was also with them. Police discovered the basement after entering. Tied up, injured, and scared, they discovered the youngster. But it wasn't just the abuse that spooked investigators. It was the one who had planned it. The sisters, no, not even the household's grown-ups. Anna was the one. Police initially thought Anna was another victim, but she didn't appear to be hurt. But the boys were malnourished, burned, and scarred. Both boys said the penalties were fair when asked. Anna told them they deserved it, they said. The sisters also stated that Anna persuaded them that it was essential. Neither had ever been abused. Their neighbors said they were nice, albeit a touch strange. However, this girl managed to persuade them to do things they never would have thought to do. Investigators looked into Anna's past. The truth came to light at that point. She wasn't 13, not even a teenager was her age. She was actually Barbara Kova, a lady in her early 30s who had a rare developmental abnormality that made her appear childlike. She has been breaking into families by pretending to be a girl. Barbara had already left by the time the authorities put this puzzle together. Months later, they found her in Poland. She pretended to be a 14-year-old guy who lived with a family that had two small children. That night, as I read at my desk, my heart was racing. There was no sense of story. It was like looking into something I shouldn't have been looking at through a window. When my mother opened the door, I was surprised. She said, "You're still awake?" I immediately reduced the screen size. "Homework." I said a falsehood. She scowled without pressing. "Soon, go to bed. Those things are bad for your brain." She was unaware of her own correctness. I went back to that topic throughout the years. It was occasionally removed and occasionally updated with further information. According to some, Barbara was associated with the Dawn movement, a fringe cult that advocated for the creation of a child messiah. Others claimed that was just conspiracy gibberish, but I was already uneasy without the need for conspiracy theories. The main plot was already horrifying. People's world had been totally altered by a stranger who had entered their lives posing as someone she wasn't. She was real, so the idea stayed with me for years. She had been there. She could do it again if she had already done it once. As an adult, I now consider what my father said. The internet is a loaded firearm. He wasn't totally incorrect. However, as I think more about it, I come to another realization. The monsters don't reside on the internet. Only the window is involved. Outside, the creatures are already present. Additionally, they occasionally knock. I never imagined that anyone outside of my family would hear the story. I kept it hidden for a long time, like something you put in the attic because it's too heavy to discard but too unsettling to display. Years later, it still occasionally wakes me up at night with flashbacks. The window creaking open, the arguments, the drive, the phone calls. When it occurred, I was 24 years old. I was still living at the time with my mom, Laura, and my stepdad, Rick, on our ranch in Cedar Ridge, Montana. It wasn't because I didn't want to move out or because I was lazy. There is a certain allure to ranch life. Whether you intend to or not, it keeps you anchored. Rick entered our lives a couple years after my dad passed away when I was 12 years old. He was trustworthy, diligent, and understanding of his mother's irascible temper. However, he was also flawed. He thought that people-less sob stories are far too common. Mom used to joke that Rick would give his boots to a stranger and slog through the snow barefoot if they told him they needed them to walk home. The joke would make him chuckle, but the truth was there. By Montana standards, our ranch wasn't large. We had a couple dozen horses, a couple dozen cattle, a handful of chickens, and 2 border collies that never seemed to get tired. Hay sales and cattle auctions provided the majority of our funding. Rick did most of the heavy work, while Mom ruled the finances with an iron fist. I contributed everything was required. Repairing fences, supplying supplies, and feeding animals. There was never enough money. Just tight enough that each purchase had to be justified, but not desperate. It was a huge issue when Rick ultimately made the decision to purchase a new work truck. A used 2014 Chevy Silverado that was strong enough to withstand ranch life was reasonably priced. However, the ancient truck, a 2005 Ford F-250 in dusty red, was still in good operating order. It was a backup that Mom wanted to maintain. Rick didn't agree. We can get several $1,000s for it. We can use that money to pay for the new debt that it makes no sense to leave it lying around. Mom scowled. What happens if the Chevy gets stuck or breaks down? Then you'll wish you had it. But ultimately, Rick's logic prevailed. On Craigslist, he put the F-250 up for sale. Craigslist is a constant risk. The majority of the replies were the typical absurd lowball proposals. He is being asked if he would swap for a purebred husky, some firearms, or an ATV. However, the message was clear. It came from a woman named Angela who resided in the rural village of High Water, which is approximately 4 hours to the east. She stated that she was in dire need of a dependable truck because she was a single mother with 2 children and 2 jobs. She said that her aging minivan was nearing the end of its useful life and that she couldn't risk having her kids in the rear when it broke down on the highway. Rick immediately showed empathy. He hung up the phone after their first conversation, looking as though he had just spoken to someone who made him think of a younger us struggling to make ends meet. Telling Mom she's the real deal, Mom wasn't convinced. You can hear it in her voice. Why won't she compromise with us if she's sincere? 4 hours isn't insignificant, but you should make the drive if you truly need something. Rick gave a head shake. Her van won't make it, she said, and she has no one to care her children. Laura, hurry up. We have also had difficult times. Her mother pursed her lips and said, this truck could change things for her, or it could be a fraud. When Rick drove the old Ford out to high water on Saturday, he persuaded Mom to follow him in the Chevy. The time was mid-February. The roads were frozen. The wind was sharp. Additionally, the sky had that gloomy, low appearance that gave you the impression that a storm was approaching at any moment. I stayed behind to take care of the housework. But even before they spoke a word, I could tell something was awry when they got home late that evening. The house shook when Mom slammed the door. Rick was uncomfortable as he entered behind her. I inquired what happened. Mom threw her gloves on the table after yanking them off. What took place? A perfectly nice truck was just given away by your stepdad in exchange for a check that won't clear until Tuesday. Rick attempted to defend himself with a post-dated check. She was in tears. Laura claimed that her direct deposit was botched up by her bank. I swear it will clear. She was already humiliated. Mom retaliated. She also requested that the plates remain in our name. Who does that? Unless they're preparing problems, who asked for something so dumb? Rick's tone grew softer. She is a single mother. Until her own plates arrived, she only wanted to confirm that she could operate it. Mom's voice rose as she scowled at him. No, she wanted to make sure it would be against us if she was stopped. And until I told you no, you were going to allow her. Rick's cheeks turned red. I couldn't drive all that far and leave her stranded. Mom gave a head shake. This is something you will regret, that I swear to you. Naturally, Tuesday arrived. The check bounced. Angela did not pick up when Rick called her. After leaving one voicemail, he left another. She eventually started coughing weakly on the third day. I apologize, she rasped. I'm in the medical facility. Pneumonia. I promise that as soon as I'm released, I'll make this right. Rick hung up without saying anything. I noticed his face hardening for once. His words were, that's it. We're getting the truck back. They returned to high water the next weekend after borrowing a flatbed trailer. Later, Mom gave a description of the property. A crumbling farmhouse, a shed that leaned so far that it appeared to be vulnerable to a strong wind, and weeds tall enough to conceal rusty appliances. They knocked and got no response, but the truck was in the shed with the keys still in the ignition. She had no intention of concealing it. When Mom informed me, she grumbled. As Rick fastened the straps, Mom wrote or placed it beneath the front door after writing a letter on a piece of paper. Rick scowled as it said, "Thanks for nothing. I hope you enjoyed wasting our time. That isn't beneficial." However, it was too late. Rick's phone rang when he was driving home. Angela was the one. Herzing, "You made a huge mistake. You believe you can rob me." Rick remained calm as he said, "I know exactly where you live." Angela simply chuckled as I said, "That was our truck. You never paid. This is over." A shattered, bitter sound. The line then stopped working. My mother's cry woke me up 2 nights later. The yelp was not one of surprise. It was an unadulterated, spine-tingling noise that, like a siren, it cut through the home. With my heart pounding, I ran out of bed. I noticed shadows flailing in my mom's and Rick's bedroom as I ran down the corridor. Halfway through the window, Angela's hair was knotted, her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with rage. She had a large kitchen knife in her hand, gleaming in the low light. "Rick!" cried Mom. Rick sprang forward and grabbed Angela's wrist. They fought fiercely as the knife clattered on the ground. The lamp broke, the furniture toppled, and there were gasps and grunts around the room. I ran in, grabbed Angela's arm, and kicked the knife across the floor. Rick and I pushed her back through the window together. She screamed when she hit the freezing ground and slammed her hands like a savage beast against the siding. Shouting, "You'll be sorry," she said. "I'll destroy you." With trembling hands, I dialed 911 as Rick slammed the window shut and locked it. She was still yelling threats when the deputies discovered her strolling the gravel road. She was taken away in handcuffs. Mom leaped at every possible situation for weeks after that. Rick appeared hollow, as if the realization of his error had finally set in. We never used Craigslist again after Rick sold the truck to a neighbor down the road. No advertisements, no strangers, just a handshake. He whispered over coffee one morning, I thought I was helping someone who needed it. I almost got us killed. Mom squeezed his hand. You have to stop seeing people for who you want them to be. See them for who they really are. The truck sat in the yard for months, untouched, like it carried some curse that by the time I was in college, browsing secondhand markets online felt natural to me. Craigslist, OfferUp, and eBay were like treasure hunts to me. If you had the patience, you could find almost anything you wanted for a fraction of what it cost in stores. I grew up in a middle-class family, and my parents were the kind of people who never bought anything brand new unless they absolutely had to. I found a decent couch, a coffee table, and even a practically new bike that way, but I never really gave it was getting the deals much thought. This was in 2018, and I had just turned 26 and had been living alone for a little over a year. My apartment in Lansing, Michigan was decent enough, but it was really rather empty. White walls, old beige carpet, and used furniture that didn't really match, and I wanted to change that. One evening after work, I was browsing Craigslist in my living room when I noticed that my dinner, leftover pasta, was sitting untouched on the coffee table. When I came along a post that attracted my attention, the headline was, "Moving sale, home decor, candles, frames, more, $20 for everything." I wasn't really looking for anything specific, but that was part of the enjoyment. I clicked it, expecting to see junk, but the pictures actually looked pretty good. A big clear storage bin filled with candles, wall art, photo frames, little vases, things you'd probably pay way more for if you bought them piece by piece. My first thought was, this is precisely what I need. Hey, is this still available? I messaged the seller, whose name was April on the listing. We texted back and forth a little, and she explained that she was moving for a new job in Grand Rapids and didn't want to take boxes of decorations with her. She sounded normal, polite, and almost too sweet in her texts. April? Yes, it is. I just need to get rid of everything because I'm moving this weekend. If you want it all, $20 takes everything. She even added a smiley face at the end. Me. That sounds perfect. I can meet after work Thursday. Word dragged on, but as soon as 5 o'clock rolled around, I grabbed my coat and drove straight over. April, Thursday works. I get off at 6 o'clock. Can you meet at the Kroger on East Sagan? Busy and safe. That last part, busy and safe, strangely calmed me down, as if she had foreseen my anxiety. The Kroger lot was packed, just as she had said, and it was mid-January, so the sky was me. Hey, I'm in a silver Honda Civic parked near the entrance. April, great. Just leaving work. Might be running a little late, though. Could you meet me closer to my job? Would save me some time. I frowned at the message. That wasn't the plan. April, where are you? It's only 15 minutes away at the strip mall on Willow Road. It was already getting dark. The IT will be easy to find me because almost everything is closed. The red Toyota SUV annoyed me, so I decided to stick to the crowded lot we had decided on. I didn't want to cause a scene, so I told myself it was just my paranoia, and I entered the address into my GPS and drove. I felt increasingly uneasy the further I traveled. Although Lansing wasn't a big city, I didn't often have a reason to go to Willow Road. I was struck by how deserted the lot was by the time I pulled in. With all of the stores shuttered and their windows obscured by security gates or posters, the strip mall was pitch black. I drove up a few spots distant and killed the engine of the red Toyota SUV that was the only vehicle parked at the far end of the lot. As I stepped outside, my breath became hazy in the icy air. I yelled softly, "April," almost expecting someone to answer the door. Instead, there was a brief silence. Then a man emerged from the SUV through the driver's side door. He wore a heavy winter jacket that zipped up to his chin, had dark hair, and was tall, possibly in his mid-30s. "Hey," he said nonchalantly, grinning at me. April was unable to attend. I promised her I would meet you since she was stalled at work. I was taken aback and blinked. "Well, I didn't hear that," he added hastily. I'm sure she didn't have time to text. "Don't worry, though. I've got everything covered. To be honest, she just told me to let it go. No fee. Free." He opened the trunk, took a step back, and gestured to it. I felt something tighten inside. My gut told me to do it. His emphasis on free felt like bait. I repressed a smile as I retreated to my vehicle. "If you don't mind, I'll just give her a brief call." His grin dimmed. "That is not necessary. It's all right, I assure you." However, I had already taken out my phone. I opened my messages. I tapped her number and pressed the call button. The chilly air was filled with a ringing sound. From his pocket, not my phone. His palm twitched toward the sound as he froze. He took a phone out of his coat slowly, looked at the screen, and hung up. I felt sick to my stomach. His visage transformed the instant he raised his head again. Just a blank, predatory stare, no friendliness. I ran to my vehicle. I pushed the door open and jumped in, my hands shaking. "Hey, hold on a minute," he yelled as he hurried over to me. With my heart pounding, I pushed the key into the ignition. Just as he got to my door handle, the engine roared to life. I sped out of the lot, tires skidding across the frozen pavement as I floored it. He was standing there, his SUV trunk still open, watching me drive off in my rearview mirror. I continued driving until I was once again illuminated by traffic and street lights. My hands continued to shake. I called my sister and told her what had happened, almost crying. "Call the cops," she demanded. Now, I did, and at a nearby gas station, I was met by an officer. I told him everything and showed him the messages. He listened, but when I was done, he sighed. Technically, he didn't commit a crime, he said, adding that it's not illegal to pretend to be someone online unless money or property is exchanged, but I'll file a report just in case. As I sat there in shock, he simply got away with "I barely slept that night," and I kept replaying the moment when his phone rang, realizing how close I came to walking toward that open trunk. I still wonder what was inside, and worse, I wonder how many people before me didn't follow their instincts. I never imagined that a simple Craigslist ad could put my son's life in danger. "For now," the officer said quietly, "but you did the right thing by trusting your gut. Next time, don't go to a second location." This all happened in 2002, when Craigslist was still in its infancy. If you're only familiar with Craigslist as it is today, with its dubious listings, phony advertisements, and stories that make the evening news, you may not understand how different it felt back then. Craigslist wasn't just a marketplace. It was more like an online community board where people posted toys, cars, furniture, and sporting equipment they no longer needed. It was casual, almost innocent. At the time, I lived in Cedar Falls, Iowa, with my wife, Lynn, and our 11-year-old son, Jacob. Our house was a 2-story split level with a faded blue paint job that was located at the end of a cul-de-sac where life wasn't perfect, but it was steady, and that meant the world to me. Jacob had one obsession: hockey. Although we lived in Iowa, which isn't exactly hockey country, he became enamored with the sport after watching an old VHS tape of the 1996 Red Wings playoff run that my brother had mailed us. He carried his hockey stick everywhere, in the driveway, basement, and backyard, but he didn't have a net. So every day after school, he would stand in the driveway and shoot a rubber ball against our garage door, acting as though he was skating in overtime of the Stanley Cup Finals. When we were clearing the dinner table one evening, Mark told me that if Jacob continued to use the garage door as his goal, we would have to replace it. I sighed. "I know, but nets cost over $200. It's not in the budget right now, Jacob." The person who overheard us looked at me with those beseeching eyes only children have, and she said, "Dad, I don't need a new one. Just a used net. Anything's better than the garage that night, Mark." When Jacob went to bed, I sat down at our big old Dell computer and opened Craigslist. I had used it a couple of times, got a free basketball hoop, and even got an old TV, but I had never looked for sports equipment before. I found it in the sporting goods section. Regulation size hockey goal, $50, with 2 sticks and a puck, slightly used. The post was brief and simple, with only a phone number and no picture, so $50 was a great deal. My son plays hockey every day, so I called the number the following evening after dinner. A man answered on the third ring, his voice low, gruff, and emotionless. "Yeah," I said, "I'm calling about the hockey net you listed. You interested?" "Yes, Barry. Where are you located?" "Mapleton," he said. I hesitated. That's a long drive, but he quickly said, "I can meet you halfway. Rest stop off I-35 near Clear Lake. Tomorrow night works." His tone sounded flat, almost too flat, but I ignored it because people on the phone didn't always sound friendly. "Tomorrow night works?" I said. "I'll be there after 9:30, but I get off work around 9 o'clock. Is that a problem?" I looked at Jacob, who was watching TV in the living room with his stick in his lap. The idea of surprising him with a net was enough to put an end to any second thoughts. No problem, I told him. The following day went by slowly. At work, I became preoccupied and kept playing back the conversation in my mind. His voice stuck with me. Jacob was giddy with anticipation when I arrived home, but I kept telling myself that I was overanalyzing the situation. Are we really receiving the net tonight, Dad? I nodded as he said, we'll use Mom's van. The only way it will fit. At night? Mark, this bothers me. Lynn scowled. The rest stop. Looking back, I wish I'd followed her gut. Can't it wait until the weekend? At least meet during the day. I rubbed her shoulder. It's the only time the guy's available. We'll be fine. I'll be careful. She wasn't convinced. Take cash only. Don't give him more than you need to, and call me as soon as you're done. When they hit the interstate, the sun had already set, and the black Iowa field on either side was only occasionally illuminated by farmhouse lights. Dad, Jacob muttered from the passenger seat. Yeah, buddy. Do you believe the van can accommodate the net? Hardly, but we'll manage, I laughed. Just after 9:30, we arrived at the rest area. The lot was almost deserted, with 3 tall light poles I parked precisely beneath one of them, and they shone weakly, their yellow lights spreading in circles on the cracked asphalt. Stay in the van, I ordered Jacob, and lock the doors until I say otherwise. A few minutes later, headlights came on the exit ramp, and a black pickup truck slid into the lot and parked just in front of us. I got out, my breath hazy in the cool night air, and the driver rolled down his window. He nodded, holding his stick uncomfortably. A shaven-headed man in his late 30s examined me. You, Mark? That's me. I responded warily in response to his question. You got the net? My friend is bringing it in his truck, he said, nodding toward the road. Should arrive at any moment. There was nothing on his bed, no sticks, no net, and I felt a chill descend on me. My chest tightened as I looked back at the van and saw Jacob staring wide-eyed through the glass. I signaled him to remain still, and a few seconds later, 2 more sets of headlights swung into the lot. 2 pickup trucks pulled up on either side of me, and the first man got out his truck, followed by the others. They were big, muscular, and heavy-set men who moved with purpose, arranged themselves in a rough half-circle about me. A man who was bald and wore sunglasses at night came forward, his voice gruff. Where's the money? I swallowed hard, pulled out my wallet, and handed it over. Take it. Please don't harm my child. This is all you have? He asked, looking through the bills without admiration. That's everything I brought? I stumbled. Please release us. He sneered, then jerked his head toward the van. Get the youngster. My heart was racing as 2 men approached Jacob. Stop, please, I yelled, my voice cracking, and one of them used his elbow to smash the van's rear window. Jacob let out a sound I will never forget, a sound that ripped through me like glass. And then, by some miracle, headlights appeared at the edge of the lot, and a police cruiser rolled in. The escape red and blue lights flared. Underscore, cops. One of the men barked. Then there was chaos. They ran for their trucks. Tires screeched. 2 trucks drove out toward the highway with their engines roaring. The 3rd truck tried, but the cruiser cut it off, pinning it in. I hurried to Jacob, who was crying inside the van. It's okay, buddy. It's okay. That night, we had a police escort all the way back to Cedar Falls, and Jacob clung to me in the passenger seat, silent except for the occasional hiccup of breath. Detectives contacted me multiple times in the weeks that followed. You're safe. Backup arrived within minutes. Officers dragged the suspect from the truck and cuffed them under the buzzing light poles. I held Jacob close, shaking uncontrollably as I explained everything to the police. They told me the suspects quickly ratted out the others, proving that loyalty wasn't their strong suit. I sat up with Jacob on the couch, whispering that he was safe, even though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Craigslist didn't feel the same after that. I never went to meet a seller alone again. Never after dark, and never with Jacob in the car. The most of the men were apprehended and charged with anything from attempted robbery to child endangerment. The one who managed to escape, Dale, was never found, according to the others. Jacob had nightmares for months. Sometimes I think about how close it was that night. I also do. I'm not sure if the police cruiser's appearance at that precise moment was a coincidence or something more significant, but I do know this. I might not be here to share this story without it. I never considered myself to be the type of person who would search Craigslist for bargains. To be honest, I'd always thought it was a bit suspicious, like the scene in Line where someone is found in the woods with duct tape covering their mouth. But instead of living comfortably, life had been about taking shortcuts during the last few years. My age is 34. Daniel Hayes is my name, and I've lived for the last 10 years in Indianapolis. I'm employed with a mid-sized insurance company in IT. The salary is decent, higher than many individuals my age receive. But I'm constantly searching for ways to cut costs because of student loans, condo fees, and inflation, which makes everything seem twice as expensive as it was. That's how I initially found myself on Craigslist. It began with the faucet at my condo. In fact, it started out as a sluggish drip and overnight became a constant stream. The wait time for repairs in my building is absurd. Additionally, they charged me 3 times as much the previous time I phoned for something that I knew could have been done in 5 minutes with a wrench. Of endurance. The only issue was that I had no tools. I was raised in the Fort Wayne suburbs. One of those guys who could fix everything was my dad. Brakes, drywall, faucets, and even the roof, which was torn off in half by a storm when I was 12. He made an effort to teach me, but I was never interested in tightening bolts. I was always more interested in computers and video games. I regretted living alone now. I decided to finally get a basic toolkit for myself. Just something that would enable me to manage the minor details so I wouldn't have to lose money every time something broke. Nothing spectacular. I was astonished by the costs on Amazon, and Home Depot wasn't much better either. I recall sitting at my desk, partly giggling when my coworker Derek casually said, "Man, just check Craigslist. People are always unloading that kind of stuff. Divorce, moving, whatever. You'll get it for half the price." Craigslist. That seems risky, doesn't it? Derek gave a shrug. Everything is risky. Don't be foolish, please. You might meet them in a public setting, or if it looks safe, drive away. I got home that evening, turned on my laptop, and entered Toolkit into the Craigslist search bar. He was not mistaken. Some of the listings were obviously pricey, while others were just odd sacks of rusting rubbish. After scrolling over each of those, I came across one that drew my eye. $50, pickup only complete toolkit, drills, sockets, and wrenches, lightly used, call or text. A respectable black tool bag filled with nearly everything I would require was depicted in the photos. It appeared well-maintained, even if it wasn't brand new. It was a great deal for $50. Expecting a response, I texted the number. Lengthy wait. However, I received a response in 15 minutes. "Yes, it's still there. You are welcome to visit at any moment after 7 p.m. tomorrow." I returned the type. "It sounds good. What's the address?" There was a pin drop in the response. "Indiana's Greenfield. This is the address." Greenfield. I needed to research it. I had never traveled out that way, although it was only roughly 45 minutes east of Indy. A small town with fewer than 25,000 residents. At the time, I was on the verge of backing out, but the price was too excellent, and I told myself it was just another regular guy getting rid of things he didn't need. After work the following evening, I got into my Civic and drove. Everything grew quieter the farther I was from the city. Already, the sky had turned from gold to black. The kind of darkness that only becomes apparent when you're not near streetlights. There were fewer gas stations. The houses appeared older and more dispersed. It felt like the middle of nowhere, even if it wasn't. I felt sick to my stomach as Google Maps showed that I was getting to my location. Along a narrow wooded road, the community was a collection of sagging houses, if you can call it that. Lights were on in a few. Most didn't. It appeared to have been abandoned since the 1950s. Weed-eating driveways, crumbling porches, and peeling paint. In front of the address, I parked. It was a modest, one-story house with grayed wood siding from years of neglect. No light on the porch. A weak lamp flickered in the front window, the only source of light. For a while, I sat in my car with my hands on the steering wheel. I whispered to myself, "This is all right." A simple grab and go. $50. Obtain the equipment. Get out. After taking out the money I had folded in my pocket, I proceeded up the gravel driveway. The first thing that struck me was quiet. Not merely silence, but dead silent. No cars driving by, no dogs barking, not even the sound of crickets chirping. I could hear my ears ringing from the silence. The door was knocked on. After a few seconds, it creaked open. The man who responded appeared to have just gotten out of bed 10 minutes prior, perhaps in the early 30s. He had a spotty beard and stringy brown hair that fell over his forehead. He was dressed in jeans that hung loosely on his body and a faded hoodie. His gaze swept over me as if he was inspecting the driveway, then returned to me. "Daniel, you?" "Yes. I assumed you were Chris because that's the name on the advertisement." He took a step back. "Enter now. The living room is where the tools are." I went inside despite my gut telling me not to. One lamp on an end table provided a soft glow for the living room. The furniture was worn and mismatched, and the walls were blank. The tool bag, just like in the photos, was sitting on the couch. I approached, knelt, and unzipped it. Every tool was present. Pliers, a cordless drill, and even wrenches. It was just what I required. However, my gaze strayed to the rear entrance. It was sagging in the frame as if someone had kicked it in, and it was actually hanging from one hinge. I stood up, turned to give Chris the money, and he left. There was nobody in the living room. My heartbeat quickened. I said, Chris, and dialed. No response. The hush was thicker now and pressed down once again. Around me, the old house squealed, the walls moaning, the flooring shifting. Or perhaps the house wasn't there. I took a deep breath and moved to the front door. I was heading out, tools or no tools. However, there was a person standing there when I walked into the corridor. Not Chris. He was taller, wider, his face obscured by the shadow, but I could still see the outline of him, with his arms drooping by his sides and his shoulders bent. I hurriedly said, "Hey," trying to laugh. I was just running out to my car to grab the money. "Be right back." No reply. He remained still. He was in the way. I heard it at that moment. A creaky floorboard. The kitchen, completely dark on my right. There was a person inside. My body took action before my mind. I whirled around and ran toward the smashed rear door. As I pushed it open and staggered into the night, the wood creaked beneath my weight. Heavy, quick footsteps behind me. My lungs were burning and my heart was pounding as I ran around the side of the house. I could see my Civic. However, someone emerged from behind it as I was about to reach it. I wasn't pursued by them. They failed to seize me. For a moment, they simply stood there, too close, too abrupt, and then scurried back into the yard shadows. I didn't pause to think. I jumped in, closed the door, and inserted the key into the ignition of my automobile. The engine surged to life after sputtering. With gravel spitting beneath my tires, I peeled out and didn't slow down until I reached the highway. I couldn't get rid of it for a few days. Who were they? Why were they all three? How would things have turned out if I hadn't run? The image of me standing in that dark hallway with the larger man in my way keeps coming back to me. He remained silent. He didn't have to. I understand the meaning of that quiet. That meant I was not allowed to go. And I doubt I would be writing this right now if I hadn't followed my instincts in that one moment. It wasn't until I lost my work that I gave Craigslist much thought. I had recently lost my job at a small office supply warehouse in Columbus, Ohio, in the fall of 2002. I wasn't even shocked when the manager drew me aside to inform me that my role was being phased out because the company had been reducing for months. Even yet, it struck me more forcefully than I anticipated. Rent, student loan payments, and a car that was on the verge of abandoning me altogether were all on my plate. Craigslist wasn't what it is today back then. This strange, nearly buried area of the internet was still there. People posted grainy photos of items they claimed were vintage, sold couches, looked for roommates, and vented about politics on it. I originally learned about it from a friend from college who told me that if you understood how to haggle, you could get secondhand electronics for incredibly low prices. I wasn't very interested in the for sale area, though. It was the gigs, the sporadic, temporary positions that appeared daily. Some were completely typical, such as distributing flyers, moving furniture, and doing yard labor. Some were so strange that you had to shake your head and giggle. Due in part to my desire for money, and in part to my fascination with the peculiarities of human nature, I began to check it every day. I came upon a post one day that has stayed with me for years. It had a straightforward title, Simple $100. Text someone. I initially believed it to be a fraud. It was a brief, nearly cryptic description. Send a single text message. Get compensated. No catch. For further information, send an email. I recall arguing while gazing at it. For me, $100 was a lot in those days. My curiosity overcame me. I sent an email. I received a response within an hour. Completely genuine. After delivery, money will be transferred to you. All you need to do is call the number I offer and convey the precise message I supply. It sounded absurd. In response to my question, "What's the message?" the man wrote, "I see you." I felt sick to my stomach. It felt improper in some way, like I was being asked to take part in a threat I didn't understand. I moved on after flagging the post and deleting the email. But I couldn't shake the uneasiness. Who was that message's recipient? And how would they have interpreted it? That was the way Craigslist sowed seeds. You laughed off some of the ridiculous advertisements. Others infiltrated your mind and remained there. I continued to browse for months. I occasionally got little jobs, like moving boxes for someone who paid me with beer and cash, or helping an elderly man change the batteries in his smoke detector. However, things became stranger the farther I traveled. Then I came across his post. I clicked on the listing that said, "Earn $1,000. Assist with medical treatment." Interest anticipating a mediocre pyramid scheme. Rather, I found myself reading it again, unsure whether to report it or chuckle. He needed someone to come to his flat and assist him in amputating his right leg below the knee. The posting explained in eerie, casual terms. He committed to managing the majority of the procedure personally. A spotter was all he needed to keep him aware long enough to cauterize the cut, secure the tourniquet, and give him tools. With payment guaranteed, he signed off. Serious questions that I just recall muttering aloud. What on earth? The email address was equally strange. A tale, legless dreamer. Commisio initiali I chocolate. Satire, of course. There was a lot of ridiculous humor on Craigslist. People post absurd things to make fun of other people. The writing was humorous, self-deprecating, and, in its madness, almost endearing. But I kept thinking about it. I sent a quick email out of the blue. "Whoever said this, thank you for making me laugh more than I have in weeks with your message. That should be the end of it," I thought. Hours later, I got a reply. "Glad you enjoyed it. But just to be clear, this isn't a joke. I'm looking for someone serious. If that's not you, no problem." I sat there rereading it. There was no aggression, no creepiness, just sincerity. I typed back, "Come on, you don't actually expect me to believe this is true." Another response almost immediately followed. "Believe what you want. I've been planning this for years. I won't bother you again if you're not interested." His name, or the one he gave me, was Marcus. He lived somewhere outside of Dayton, Ohio, and he claimed to have been obsessed with amputation since he was a young boy, dating back to when a high school football star in his town lost his leg in a car accident. Everyone else pied him. Marcus. It was courteous, firm, and unsettlingly realistic. That was the beginning. His words unnerved and fascinated me. And I should have cut contact, but instead I leaned in and began asking questions, half because I couldn't take my eyes off him, half because I was jealous. He was changed, and people treated him as if he had survived something profound. One night, while sitting in my old Dell computer in my small apartment, I typed, "If you're serious, prove it. Show me something that I regretted it," as soon as I sent it. When his email arrived the following evening, it contained 2 attachments. A blurry picture of a hand with the words "Legless Dreamer, September 22nd, 2002, written in marker on the palm, omitting the pinky finger, and a video file. Before I could stop myself, I clicked on the shaky, grainy video, which showed a masked man sitting at a kitchen table with 2 bolt cutters. He placed them over his little finger, adjusted them once, and then snapped them shut without hesitation. The screen shook as the camera tipped over, and the sound, sharp, wet, and final, made my stomach turn. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart thumping in my chest, and I knew it wasn't fake. I was hooked. I told myself that I was sending Marcus emails out of curiosity, maybe even concern, but I knew deep down that it was more sinister than that. In one email, Marcus insisted, "They're not crazy. They're just chasing the version of themselves that feels real." He told me stories of people in what he called the body integrity community, people who felt they were living in the wrong body, desperate to get rid of parts that didn't belong. Some mutilated themselves beyond repair. while others froze their limbs until hospitals had no choice but to amputate. At times, his words felt almost normal. I wasn't sure whether to argue, feel sorry for him, or be afraid. The last email I ever received from him said, "Today's the day," and he was not some cartoon villain. Rather, he was shockingly human. And he told me about his time spent volunteering at a food pantry, his mother's cooking, and his love of the fragrance of autumn leaves after rain. Someone was willing to assist me. I prepared for this, so don't worry. I will provide an update shortly. He never got back to me. Initially, I obsessively refreshed my inbox every hour. Days went by, followed by weeks. Months later, I would lie awake at night, replaying his words, the video, and that calm politeness in his tone. Sometimes I convinced myself that he'd gone through with it and survived, living quietly somewhere, finally content. Other times, darker thoughts crept in. Maybe he bled out on a bathroom floor. Maybe his helper wasn't prepared. Maybe his obsession killed him. The silence became unbearable, so I sent desperate follow-ups. Did it go okay? Just let me know you're alive, Marcus. I still wonder if Marcus's last words were true, that he'd finally done it, that he'd found his version of peace, but I'll never know. And maybe that's the real horror. It's been more than 20 years, and I still occasionally think about Marcus and how easy it was to stumble into someone else's darkness on a website that felt like a digital flea market. Craigslist was full of couches, cars, and free kittens, but it also hid people like him. People chasing something most of us can't even begin to comprehend. Not in the way I had hoped, anyway. I had hoped for a new chapter, a better salary, new opportunities, and possibly even new friends when I accepted the promotion that took me from Arizona to Colorado. But instead, I learned a lesson that will always stick with me. How vulnerable we are when we allow the wrong person into our lives. My name is Ken Pierce, and this is what happened to me. It wasn't easy to leave Tucson, where I had spent 32 years of my life, surrounded by family, familiar streets, and routines I could follow without a blindfolded. My mother wept when I packed, and my brother told me I was crazy for leaving, but I dismissed it with the assurance that comes from thinking you've made the right decision. The drive took 2 long days, and when my company announced they were opening a new branch office in northern Colorado, they offered me a managerial position. This meant doubling my salary, more authority, and the opportunity to advance even further, but it also meant uprooting my life. I had sold almost all of my furniture before moving, and my old couch was falling apart, and my dresser's drawers were stuck, so I decided it wasn't worth the trouble of hauling all across states. That decision came back to haunt me on my first night in Ashford Ridge, where I remember unlocking the front door, carrying in my last box, and standing in the empty living room. The townhouse I bought wasn't big, but it was new enough to feel clean and safe, with 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, beige carpet, and a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town, but it was empty. My mattress was leaning against the wall upstairs, but the rest of the space was empty and suffocatingly quiet. I initially told myself that it was only temporary and that I would get furniture soon, but every day I returned from work, the emptiness wore me down more and more until it felt more like a shell than a home. So I turned to Craigslist, which I had used years before. The first few weeks went well. I found a nightstand from a retired couple who were kind and even offered me lemonade when I stopped by, a coffee table from a young man moving to another state, a lamp from a college student who was just looking for beer money, and every single experience was normal, easy, and friendly even. I picked up a used desk, a coffee table, and even an old guitar once, but I never relied on it. Nevertheless, it seemed like the cheapest and fastest way to fill my place without going broke. Then, one evening after work, as I was looking through my phone's listings, I came across a gray sectional sofa for $200 that had to go this week. The picture was a little grainy, but it was clear enough to see that it was exactly what I wanted. Clean lines, modern style, barely looked used, and $200. That was a great deal, so I texted right away. Me. Hello. Is the sectional still available? The man identified himself as Bryce Halden, and his messages were brief. Seller, I got a truck. I can bring it to you if you want. Easier that way. Seller, yeah, still have it. You interested? Me, definitely. The only problem is I just have an SUV. Might take a couple trips to move it. The simple solution was to set it up for the next day at 6 p.m. The next morning before heading out for work, I sent him my address, and he immediately replied, "Got it." To be honest, he seemed like just another person trying to offload furniture quickly. I was apprehensive about giving my address to a stranger, but I was also reminded of how inconvenient it would be to make multiple trips. "I'll see you at 6 o'clock." I was oddly excited the entire time I was at work. I was home by 5:45 with the blinds half open and the TV droning in the background. I paced a bit, waiting for him to come. At precisely 6 o'clock, headlights slid down the street, and I peeked out. A black pickup truck rolled slowly by, but my heart sank when I saw that the bed was empty. No sectional, not even tie-down straps. I got to the end of the street, turned, and crawled back. This time it slowed right in front of my house, so I ducked behind the blind a little, feeling uneasy. Whoever was inside seemed to be looking for a while before rolling away. So I took out my phone and said, "Hey, was that you? I thought I saw your truck drive by and delivered, but I got no response, so I tried again 10 minutes later." "Me? Still on your way?" That one didn't even deliver. Worry gave way to frustration. Perhaps he sold it to someone else. Perhaps he was flaking. Craigslist was full of these situations. By 7 o'clock, I gave up. I carried my laptop upstairs, reheated leftovers, and tried to brush it off. At least that's what I believed I did. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. I sat up, heart pounding, with slow, deliberate footsteps pressed against the tile downstairs, each step echoing, careful and steady, until I heard a voice. Callan, deep, flat, emotionless. My blood froze. He said my name again. Callan. The front door creaked open, and it had a very distinct groan, one I'd noticed since moving in. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs, and I didn't recognize it. Not a neighbor, not a coworker, no one I'd ever heard before. I trembled and whispered into the phone as I dialed 911, saying, "There's someone in my house." He broke in. He knows my name. The dispatcher told me to remain calm and hidden, and that officers were on their way. Downstairs, the voice called again, "Callan." My heart was beating so loudly that I thought he might hear it, so I crawled into the closet, clutching the phone until my knuckles hurt. Then there was silence. The voice stopped, the footsteps stopped, the minutes seemed to drag on forever, and at last, flashing red and blue lights spilled across my blinds. The police searched the house, but no one was there, but the lock on the front door had been picked clean. Even now, months later, I can still hear the voice, the way he said my name, not rushed, not angry, just certain, like he already knew exactly where I was, and maybe worse, what he planned to do. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd end up writing a story like this. I told them everything, the Craigslist post, the truck circling, the texts, and I showed them my phone, but the number was already dead, disconnected, a burner, and there was no way to track him down. When I was 23, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment in Brenton, a mid-sized city 45 minutes from Chicago. It wasn't glamorous, and the carpet was worn out, but if there was one thing that made my days feel a little brighter, it was dogs. I grew up in a home where my parents were allergic, so I never had the opportunity to have one as a child. But as soon as I moved out and got my first real place, I promised myself that one day, when I was financially stable enough, I would finally adopt a dog. I shared it with my boyfriend, Ryan, who I had been dating for a little over 6 months at the time. He was my first serious relationship, the kind where you start daydreaming about marriage, kids, and a future together. And that's what led me to say the words one Saturday morning in March. What if we adopted a puppy? He was half asleep on the couch, his hair sticking up in all directions, scrolling through his phone. At first, he laughed, but his expression softened when he realized how serious I was. "You're serious about wanting one?" "I've always wanted one," I replied. "And to be honest, I think it could be good for us," he inquired. "Similar to a test run. Check to see whether we're prepared for future, larger tasks." "You mean a trial run for kids?" Ryan chuckled. "Exactly," I said. 2 weeks later, we were driving home from the Brenton Animal Shelter with a wriggling Jack Russell Terrier puppy in my lap. He had big ears, bright brown eyes, and more energy than either of us could manage. We named him Oscar, and as soon as he set his little paws inside our apartment, everything changed. There were barks, the sound of nails clicking across the linoleum, squeaky toys being destroyed in record time, and yes, little accidents on the carpet. Despite the mess, we fell in love with Oscar right away, and he became our little family. Ryan loved Rough House with Oscar, holding up toys just high enough for him to jump like a little acrobat. And at night, Oscar curled between us, snoring softly, making the bed feel fuller and warmer. However, Oscar had one flaw: the dumpsters out back. This row of dented, overflowing dumpsters behind our apartment complex attracted rats. Lots of them. It was disgusting. Every day after work, I would drop my bag and immediately hear the thundering of his paws racing toward the door. The unit was on the ground floor, and every time we passed them on our daily potty training walks, Oscar would go crazy. He would growl, bark, and lunge against the leash, as if the scent had flipped a switch in his brain, waking up some deep-seated hunting instinct he couldn't control. Things got worse the first time he actually saw one of the rats, almost yanking the leash out of my hands and hurling himself at the wooden fence separating the dumpster area from the highway beyond. Ryan and I exchanged a look that day, and we agreed in silence that we would have to stay away from the back lot going forward, but fate had other ideas. When I woke up the following morning, the apartment felt strange, too quiet, and I walked into the living room to find the back door cracked open. "Ryan," I said sharply, shaking him awake. "Where's Oscar?" After going out with friends and returning home drunk sometime after midnight, I didn't hear him come in because I was already asleep. "What?" The door was open, and his voice sounded hazy. He bolted upright, searching the apartment after realizing where he was. We searched every room, closet, and corner, but we found nothing. Oscar was gone. I can't even describe the feelings that came over me. My chest felt like it had collapsed. I was unable to breathe, and I couldn't look at Ryan without wanting to scream. We searched the neighborhood for hours, calling out Oscar's name. We taped up missing posters on light poles and near bus stops, shaking treat bags and showing his photo to strangers on the street. Ryan was desperate to make amends, even posting on Craigslist under the pet section. "Lost dog, reward offered." Small Jack Russell Terrier named Oscar, last seen near Brennan Apartments. "Please help us bring him home." The first 24 hours were terrible, and I kept checking every 10 minutes to see if anyone had responded to the Craigslist post. Refreshing. Nothing. I had lost hope by the second night. I knew that missing pet stories didn't usually end well, and even though Ryan wouldn't say it aloud, I could tell he felt the same way. Then, on the third day, we received an email that said, "Hey, 2 nights ago, I found a small dog wandering near the highway. After I picked him up and brought him home, I'll learn about your Craigslist ad from a friend." I looked at the picture. The dog is unquestionably the same. Even Oscar gets a response from him. I've been giving him chicken and using a rope leash to take him for quick walks. In order to schedule a pickup, below is my phone number. It was unbelievable to me. I was so relieved that I burst into tears. Ryan dialed the number right away. A man replied. He had an older, gruff, but amiable voice. Everything in the communication was confirmed by him. In his care, Oscar was secure. He resided in the harsher part of Brenton's south side. "Don't worry," he laughed. "Oscar has been in my cool basement. Until you come get him, he's secure here." Ryan hesitated at the term cellar. "Why would you keep it down there?" Ryan hung up and asked. I answered, because maybe the guy doesn't want his house destroyed. Oscar lacks sufficient training. It makes sense. Although he didn't seem persuaded, Ryan didn't argue with me about it. Oscar would be picked up later that afternoon, as planned. The further we went, the worse the neighborhood got. Drove. Homes with overgrown grass, boarded up windows, and flaking paint. I silently hoped that my phone was mistaken, but it persisted that we were on the correct path. At last, we pulled up in front of a 2-story house that was sagging. It was daylight, but the porch light flickered. A man wearing jeans and a plaid shirt stood in the doorway. His teeth were twisted as he waved at us. He yelled, "You have to be here for Oscar." I wanted to rush up to him, grab Oscar, and hold him tight. However, the fragrance hit me as soon as we stepped onto the porch. Mildew rot. The man gestured inside and added, "He's downstairs." Ryan tensed up next to me. "Could you mention him?" he inquired. The man paused in his smile. "He's right down there. Won't take a minute." "We'd rather wait out here," Ryan stated with determination. The man's voice became flat and his eyes darkened. He vanished inside, leaving the door wide, and said, "Suit yourselves." Minutes went by. The whisper, "Too many minutes. Something's wrong," came from Ryan. I began by saying, "We should go. We can't just." The man then reappeared at the doorway, though. He had lost his kindness. His face was expressionless, even icy. He questioned, "You're not coming in?" "No," Ryan replied. Now his voice was piercing. The man looked at us for a long time before saying, "We'll wait out here." He said that too nonchalantly. We turned and walked back to the car after saying, "Your loss." I struggled with the door handle, my hands shaking. Until we drove away, the man silently observed us. I had trouble sleeping that night. The scent was reproduced in my head every second. His tone changed, as did the expression in his eyes. The following morning, I checked the address. I felt sick to my stomach. Years before, the house had been foreclosed. It was not intended for occupancy. I made a police call. A patrol vehicle was dispatched. An officer returned the call hours later. He spoke in a clipped, almost defensive tone. "We looked over the property. You and your boyfriend are very fortunate that you chose not to go inside," he remarked. "What do they find?" I inquired. Occasionally, when the apartment gets too quiet late at night, I worry about the man standing in the doorway, about what was waiting in that basement, and about what might have happened if Ryan hadn't insisted that we stay outside. He wouldn't say anything more than to reiterate, "You were lucky." We never saw Oscar again. How many others weren't as fortunate as us? I wonder. I never imagined that I would be the type to search online for love or even just company. If I'm being completely honest, though, loneliness has a way of putting you in situations you never would have imagined. About a year had passed since Clara, my long-term girlfriend, broke up with me. After nearly 5 years of dating since college, I was certain that we would get married. However, the plans you set in your youth are often shattered by the realities of life. She claimed that she couldn't turn down a job offer from another state. "We could make it work from a distance," I assured her. "I'm not sure I want to," she said. I didn't see her again after that talk. I have immersed myself into my work ever since. I lived in a little apartment outside of Dayton, Ohio, at the age of 29, working for a shipping company where the days blended into a never-ending loop of late-night takeaway, fluorescent lights, and warehouse dust. I had companions, but the majority of them were either married or had children. The nights grew too long and silent. So I wasn't desperate when I happened upon Craigslist personal ads one night. That's what I told myself, anyway. I was simply wondering. That was all. Most of the advertisements were just what I had anticipated. My skin crawled from spammy rubbish, phony-looking profiles, or overly aggressive proposals. But after scrolling for 10 minutes or so, I noticed one. It was brief, straightforward, and almost informal. Simply ended things, seeking a lighthearted, no-strings relationship. "If you're interested, message me." A picture was included. A girl sits on a bed's edge, grinning at the camera as if she had just been caught in the act. Her eyes were green, her hair was auburn, and she had an intimidating beauty, the kind of woman I would expect to pass me by in real life without a second look. I whispered, "Yeah, right," to myself. I still clicked reply, though. My message was awkward and brief. "Hey, I'm Nate," or something similar. I didn't anticipate a response, but I saw your post. "If you're sincere, perhaps we could speak." Not really. However, my phone buzzed less than 5 minutes later. Hi, Nate." "Yes, I'm being serious. I just want something easy." My pulse quickened as I gazed at the computer. It felt too simple. After a few messages, she sent me a provocative photo, not just the kind you'd post on Facebook, of Jesus Christ. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, almost dropping my phone, and I sat there with my thumb hovering over the screen, my brain screaming, "This is a scam." We went back and forth for a while, and she told me her name was Lena, that she lived about 20 minutes outside the city, and that she had recently broken up with her boyfriend, who had been an her. The pit of my stomach told me something else, but this is a setup. But what if it isn't? I chose to put her to the test. I typed half-jokingly, "If this is real, send me a picture holding a paper with my name on it." I didn't think she would actually do it, but 10 minutes later, another picture appeared of Lena sitting cross-legged on her bed with a notebook written in bold black marker on it. I slept in his arms, feeling my knees crawl under my skin. Over the course of the next hour, the artist informed me when he first reached my heart over his phone, and each time I had something between my arms when he insisted on taking me home after dinner. I agreed with nothing, so I scurried out of it. "You should quiet against a friend," he said. I tried again. I dropped the knife, and perhaps his smile was due to his stubborn gaze. They didn't try to stop me from standing in the front. They just stood there and disappeared unexpectedly every night. I was there, and they erased my camera. Didn't you try to leave my heart against my stop already? You know why I chose to give my neighbor headlights? When I got home, I was down because it was only a joke. They pretended that my phone was there. My boyfriend touched me, and we had to leave right at the middle of the night. We were just playing with other people's lives. Stumbling stared at her, and they tried to brush it off. It was dark in the house, and if I hadn't had a window, I would still be driving in the shadows, so I might not be in the moment right now. However, now that I had no choice, they weren't bored, and sometimes they were predators when I woke up in the middle of the night. I can still see their faces in my head, and I can sometimes still feel the way they stared at me. It's the worst part. That ad vanished the following day. But who's to say it wasn't replaced by another one? And who's to say they're not still out there waiting for the next Nate to fall for the bait? Evan Mercer, who at the time had just moved to Dayton, Ohio for a new job, was lonely in a way that felt heavy. I spent my days in a dull office and my nights in a small, dimly lit one-bedroom apartment where the silence pressed on me like a weight. After a few weeks, I realized I needed to put myself out there somehow, and bars weren't my thing, and online dating apps always felt like a meat market. People swiping left and right without even reading what you wrote. Craigslist, although it seemed a little archaic, like posting a flyer on a corkboard, required users to type something out, which made it feel a little more real. That's how I came across Marcus's ad. It was straightforward, almost awkward, which set it apart from the typical sleazy stuff. I'm looking for someone to have a drink with, laugh a little, and see where it goes. If you're interested, send me an email. No shirtless selfies, no lengthy demands, just a few words. We exchanged emails for the next week, and I felt comfortable enough to meet him because he was funny, thoughtful, a little rough around the edges in the way he phrased things, but never unkind. I stared at the advertisement for a long time before writing a reply, and I told him I was new to town, that I worked in accounting, and that I liked bad jokes and cheap beer. I received a response within an hour. His writing style was warm but casual, and he made a joke about accountants being spreadsheets with legs that truly made me laugh aloud. When Marcus arrived, he didn't look like the kind of guy I usually go for: tall, broad shoulders, a little scruffy with messy dark hair. But as soon as he smiled, I relaxed. He was magnetic in person. "Evan," he asked, sliding into the booth. "Yeah, you must be Marcus." "Good guess," he said with a smile. We chose Ali's Pub, a noisy Irish-style bar close to downtown, where the Friday crowd was swarming onto the sidewalk, and the music was reverberating through the walls. The conversation proceeded from there. Inquiring, listening intently, and leaning forward when I talked, he gave me the impression that I was the only person in the room. For the first time in months, I found myself giggling. "You're way easier to talk to than I expected." After my second beer, I confessed. "Same," he said. The majority of individuals on the internet come out as either phony or overly effortful. You're simply typical in a positive sense. The night dragged on. To keep the evening going, he once recommended that we go to a neighboring pool hall. "Come on," he said. "You can even win a game with me." I chuckled. "You're on, but don't try anything amusing because I'm driving." With a gesture of feigned submission, he raised his hands. Scouts are honorable. The clack of pool balls and neon signage illuminated the dimly lighted pool hall. We played a few rounds and ordered another round. I was surprised to find that I was winning, and he let out a loud moan. Leaning on his QST stick, he accused me of being hustled. I laughed and added, "I swear I'm not." At that moment, his phone began to buzz. The screen was lit up as it sat on the edge of the table. His entire manner changed as he looked at it. His shoulders stiffened, his smile dimmed. I thought, bad news? He took a while to respond. Rather, he brushed his hands over his face, put the cue down, and groaned. At last he remarked, "Look," his voice suddenly husky. "I should probably tell you something." A knot developed in my stomach. Then he responded bluntly, "Okay, I just got out of prison a couple of months ago. I have a criminal record. What was I trying to process when I blinked? Foolish underscore from my youth. Entering, fighting, and breaking pharmaceuticals. I've been making an effort to start over." He looked directly into my eyes. "I didn't want to scare you away before you even met me, but I also didn't want to keep it a secret." I was unsure of how to react. A part of me, perhaps the part that detested conflict, just sat there motionless, while another part of me wanted to jump up and go. Almost nonchalantly, he said, "And one more thing. I currently live with my girlfriend. It's not serious. It's more of a predicament till I stand up." My throat became parched. "You live with your girlfriend? Hold on. It's not what you think, though." He pointed to the tabletop phone. "That text was sent just now. It comes from her. She had seen us earlier at the bar." My blood froze. She was present. I suppose she did follow me. His mouth was clenched as he spoke, as if it were nothing. I desired to leave. The night had changed from being enjoyable to becoming oppressive. I had, however, driven us here. I couldn't simply abandon him. When I said, "Let's get you back to your car," I tried to sound calm. At first, there was a dense quiet in my car. He dozed off in the passenger seat and gazed out the window. Then he suddenly broke down in tears. It was silent at first, just sniffling. Then it got sharper and louder till he started crying. "I apologize," he choked. "I mess everything up. I sabotage all the nice things." I tightened my hold on the wheel. "It's okay, Marcus. We'll simply return you to your vehicle." "No, it's not okay." He struck his thigh with his fist. "You're not understanding. I keep __ up and try to get better. I'm going to lose her. Everyone abandons me." I was at a loss for words. My mind was racing and my pulse was pounding. Then he reached out and grasped the doorknob of the automobile door. "What are you doing?" I yelled. "This is not something I can accomplish." "Pulling at the handle," he sobbed. Marcus paused. "The goddamn highway is where we are." My hands trembled as I struck the child lock so quickly. Panic made my stomach turn over. We were both dead if he opened that door. My voice cracked as I pleaded, "Please just sit back. We're nearly there. Hold on." His words were slurred and broken as he slumped back, still crying. I prayed that he wouldn't lunge again while I kept my eyes on the road. It seemed like an hour during the 10-minute drive. I put the car in park when we eventually pulled into the parking lot of the bar. "There," I told him sternly. "Your car is right there." He wiped his face, said something I couldn't make out, and lurched out of my car. I didn't wait. I sped off, hands trembling, heart hammering. I assumed that was the end of it. But 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "This is Anna. I'm Marcus's girlfriend. I know you saw him the other night." Attached were images of her face injured, swelling. Her lips split open. I felt sick to my stomach. She told me he'd hit her after confronting him about me. She wrote paragraph after paragraph outlining how he'd isolated her, controlled her, and hurt her for years. I felt nauseous. The man who made me laugh, who leaned forward like he cared about every word I uttered, he was a vicious monster behind closed doors. I kept communicating with Anna, partly out of remorse, partly because I couldn't believe what I'd almost entered into. She told me stories that left me trembling. He had smashed her phone so she couldn't call anyone, and he had locked her in the bedroom on other occasions. The way he always hit her and then screamed and pleaded. She eventually broke up with him. She filed for a restraining order, moved in with her sister, and somehow, we became friends over those drawn-out, intense talks. I sometimes reflect on that night, how easily I could have been the one, and how easily someone can go from being endearing to being terrifying. I was altered by it. I no longer look via Craigslist. I pay attention to warning signs. Additionally, I've discovered that the most terrifying monsters aren't always lurking in the shadows. Until the mask comes off, they're sitting across from you at a bar, making you laugh and making you feel visible. The outcome of that evening could have been far worse, and I will always remember it. When this occurred, I was 22 years old, and occasionally, I reflect on how nearly I was absent from this place. I was still residing with my parents in a modest home on Ashbrook's outskirts at the time, a chilly small town nestled on the Midwest's edge. There were harsh winters with ice-slick roads, power outages during storms, and extended periods of seclusion during which snow piled up against doors. At the time, I had very little going for me. My parents requested me to assist with a few bills and gas, and I was barely making ends meet while working part-time at a shipping warehouse. My getaway had always been playing video games. Since my dad brought home our first clumsy desktop computer and let me play around with Microsoft Paint, I've grown up with him. On those evenings when I didn't want to think about how empty my life seemed, my PlayStation 3 was my lifeline. However, My young cousin spent Christmas vacation there. Careless in that sense, he was 8 years old. Only children can be. After he slipped his hand and spilled a bottle of Mountain Dew over my console, everything was gone. In addition to being angry, I felt empty. All of a sudden, the only thing that kept me warm over long nights and long shifts was a dead piece of plastic. I ended up on Craigslist because of that. Ashbrook was covered in a thick layer of snow in December, only a few days before the new year. Partly distracted, partly desperate, I recall browsing through the for sale section while sitting on my bed. The majority of listings were either blatant scams or expensive. Then I noticed it, $120 for the PlayStation 3. In good shape, no longer needed, as quickly as feasible. It was a brief description. It functions well, includes a single controller. I simply need the money immediately. It's first come, first served. I was captivated by something about it. It was easy, no pretense, no effort to seem sophisticated. It was inexpensive, but not ridiculously so. Just enough for me to suspect that the man may be in dire need of quick cash. With my hand hovering above the respond button, I hesitated. Craigslist, dubious parking lot transactions, and people who weren't who they said they were all things my parents had always cautioned me about. But I promised myself I would be clever. The PlayStation would be my first choice. I'd give you the money if it worked. Otherwise, I would go. Simple. I texted the number as a result. The response was practically immediate. Vendor. Hello. Yes, it's still with me. Would you like to get together tonight? Me? It depends. Where? Vendor. Old Mall on a Hill. Kmart side around 8. Bring money. I'd rather not spend the entire night sitting cold. The shopping center on the hill. For years, that location had been deserted. Graffiti was painted on the walls, and half of the stores were boarded up. With the exception of children who occasionally congregate there at night, the parking lot is deserted and riddled with weeds. As you pass by, you could have thought, man, that's depressing. I felt a knot in my stomach. I didn't want to back out, though. Not after persuading myself that this was my opportunity. Me. All right. 8 pieces. I take it you'll let me view it before I pay? Vendor. I'm not a scammer, of course, haha. The rule was meant to calm me down. It didn't. The streets were partially covered in ice by nightfall. I informed my parents that I was going to get some lunch while they were watching television in the living room with a fire in the fireplace. My father gave me a 20 and said, avoid leaving too late. The roads are filthy. I kept the money in my pocket. I didn't want to listen to the lecture, but I felt a twinge of shame for lying. With the exception of my beat-up Honda Civic's heater rattling, the drive to Hillside Mall was quiet. Snowflakes swirled in the headlights while the streets were empty. Each block felt more deserted than the one before it. I felt as though I had entered an other world when I turned into the mall lot. It was dead, an enormous patch of fractured asphalt out into the night. Overhead, the ancient Kmart sign with its partially fallen and discolored letters. A dark automobile with its headlights off was parked at the far end of the lot. My heart thumping in my chest, I slowed. There was a person resting against the door on the driver's side, a man wearing a sweatshirt. When he noticed me, he held out a hand, casual, as if this were the most commonplace thing ever. I parked 10 feet or so away. Every nerve in my body is telling me to drive while the engine is idle. Away. You got the cash? He said again. He spoke in a casual, almost bored tone. Trying to hide my nerves, I left. Yeah, you got the PlayStation. His chin twitched toward the rear seat. That's right there. Take a look. I'm moving closer, snow crunching beneath my boots. It was an older vehicle, an old Ford car with windows darkened. There was a box on the seat when I pulled open the back door. It was not sealed. There was a console inside. However, it didn't appear right. It looked like it had been in someone's garage for years, dusty, scratched, and tangled cables. This isn't a PS3, I scowled. I sensed movement behind me before I could take a step back. The man moved in closer. Too near. He was taking something out of his waistline when I turned around. A firearm. He spoke softly. Steady. Now give the money over. I felt sick to my stomach. In my throat, the night air froze. I was having trouble breathing. My voice broke. Cash, I thought. He lost his temper. Don't make things more difficult. As I reached into my pocket, my hands trembled. I became aware of something else at that point. I caught a glimpse of movement in the driver's seat out of the corner of my eye. Another stranger watched me from a low crouch. This wasn't only a copy. It was a prelude. Hardest part was that I had a strong instinct that they wouldn't allow me simply give them the money and leave. In the hopes that it would suffice, I threw the envelope into the back seat. Take it there. I'm leaving. The man, however, did not retreat. He didn't appear content. His icy, calculating gaze remained fixed on me. At that point, instinct seized over. I whirled and ran for my car. The night was split by a crack. Near my feet, the ground kicked up. A shot. I ran despite almost tripping. Fingers fumbling for the doorknob. Lungs burning. A sharper, glass-shattering shot rang out again. My back window shattered into pieces. With trembling hands, I slammed the door, jumped into the driver's seat, and turned the key. I floored out of the lot as the tires screeched and the engine screamed. Their headlights flared to life as I watched them scurrying into their car in the rearview mirror. My heart almost stopped. They were pursuing me. It was slippery on the roads. As I raced through the snowy streets, my car was fishtailing. I was unable to think or breathe. All I knew was that if they caught up, I was dead. In the hopes that no other vehicles were out, I sped past stop signs and through side streets. For what seemed like an eternity, their spotlights followed, getting closer every time I slowed. At last, I made a sharp turn onto a small lane behind the former train station. I'd used that shortcut 100 times. As they struggled to stay on the ice, their automobile swerved. I was afraid they were going to catch up to me, but then their headlights disappeared. They had either given up or spun out. I didn't pause to look. With my chest heaving, I drove straight home, my tires crunching as I pulled into my parents' driveway. I shut all the curtains, locked all the doors, and sat in the dark, looking at the broken glass over my rear seat. My parents believed that I would just gone to eat. In actuality, though, I had just about survived. Furthermore, the idea that troubled me the most wasn't the I lost money. This was it. $100 was not what they had desired. They had desired me. And I don't think I would have run when I did if I hadn't followed my instincts. Be present to inform you of this.